one.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Studio Rat HQ podcast. This is podcast number 4 for us. My name is Stephen Couch, and I'm here with Derek Jablonski and Richard Kaplan.
Hello.
This is a series of podcasts about 3 audio engineers / musicians, and we talk about engineering, making records, being musicians, and etc. The focus so far has been records that were made at Richard Kaplan's recording studio called Indigo Ranch in Malibu, California. So far, we've done 2 albums by Korn and Slipknot's first big album, all of which, as I said, were recorded at Indigo Ranch. And today we're going to talk about Sepultura, Roots, Bloody Roots. But before I begin, let me just say a couple of things. Please follow us at facebook.com/Studio Rat HQ. The website is studiorathq.com.
Mm-hmm.
And usually when you see one of our postings, you can also see that we are available on Podomatic. So if you don't have YouTube and you want to download this podcast, you can find us and every podcast we've done so far at Podomatic, which is just an MP3 file, no video but audio. So thanks for joining us, and let's talk a little bit about Roots, Bloody Roots. Great album.
Yes.
Few bits of information about it from Wikipedia. It was released on February 20th, 1996. One thing we normally do on this show is tell you the top 5 hit singles and albums, but we've already done 1996, so you can hear that in other podcasts. This was a Roadrunner Records release with Ross Robinson producing. It sold more than 2 million copies worldwide, had a lot of guests that it also recorded at Indigo Ranch, including Jonathan Davis and David Silveria of Korn, DJ Lethal from Limp Bizkit, and Mike Patton from Faith No More. The reception to the album was widely critically acclaimed because it took up a different type of sound for a heavy metal band in that they incorporated a lot of sounds from their native Brazil, which leads us right into talking about that recording. When Sepultura showed up, Richard, did they have all these Brazilian instruments, or did you have to rent them, or did
They did have a bunch of very interesting Brazilian instruments, like a talking box percussion instrument and some long string bow instruments and stuff like that. But basically, they were a rock and roll band with 2 guitarists, one of which was the main vocalist, Max, and a drummer, Igor, who was Max's brother,
right,
and a bass player, and they were basically just a
heavy metal.
already famous heavy metal band. One of the cuts on the album, you mentioned, the Brazilian aspect of it, was actually they flew to Brazil and recorded that one tribal piece out in the jungle with native Brazilians, and they rented a bunch of equipment from me to take with them, including this microphone, which will also be shown in a better photo than me waving it in front of the pod camera, a Sony ECM56. And one of the reasons that they did that was because that microphone was not only ultra high quality for percussion and would withstand great sound pressure level, but that it was battery powered with an easily available 9-volt battery. Most microphones of that day that were battery powered required some weird battery that you would not only never find in the jungle, but even in Los Angeles, you'd have to go to someplace like Pacific Radio just to find that battery.
Right.
So that was one of the advantages of them taking Sony ECM series microphones with them.
So if the purpose of that is if whatever recording device they had didn't have phantom power, it could work on its own, or
Yes.
right, right.
Yes.
Okay, I got it. Yeah, I saw Sepultura on the Chaos AD tour. They opened for Ministry, which was doing the Psalm 69 tour, and Roots is a very different sound than Chaos AD and their other
Oh my
records.
gosh, yeah, no kidding.
You know, and
Yeah.
one of the things is, of course, Andy Wallace came in and mixed this, and
He mixed all of Sepultura's albums.
well, I think he actually
That was just they considered him to be part of the group, and even though we were able to get mixes that, in many cases, I think beat the finished album mixes, they were committed to him as the mix engineer, and Andy's a great mixer. You know, don't let me disparage him in any way whatsoever. And he did an unbelievable job of putting the album into a really clear perspective with a good soundstage. But some of the really heavy songs where we use the bigger muff, which will be pictured at some point, which I built basically for this album, we had some mixes that I think were more aggressive, but possibly not as much of what they wanted to end up on the finished album. And as I've said many times, a song's not done until the album's released.
right. Well, Andy, I think, actually produced Chaos AD more than just mixing it. And
oh yeah,
one of the things I noticed about Roots, and this sounds like details, but it's in the details, is that particularly with the drums, the toms have a decay that is longer than I've heard on most heavy metal records. They really resonate, and I imagine, I wasn't there for the mixes, of course, but there was a lot of filtering going on to get that.
I think that we actually recorded those sounds, and part of it was the Indigo recording technique used on toms and Igor's tuning. He tuned them to have long decay. I mean, you can tune a tom-tom so that it is basically just, a tone and a hit and a quick decay, or you can loosen the bottom head a bit so that you get a longer decay.
Right.
And he set the drums up for a good long decay. We used Sennheiser 421s on the tom-toms, which was our standard tom mic,
Right.
and AKG tube C12As underneath the tom, actually Nuvistor, but it's so similar to a tube, we'll not get into that. And the toms actually sounded that way
Right.
as you played the drums back.
Yeah,
We also used our typical overabundance of room mics and the Battleship mic to fill in that extra decay naturally.
right. No, you can. It's very present, and specifically in the song "Roots," you can hear it when he hits. There's it's like the third section of the song where he hits the floor toms, and they just resonate forever.
And
Wow.
this album, Roots, was this one produced by Ross also?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, because I was gonna say, I was a fan of Chaos AD as a kid, and then when this album came out, I heard quite a difference, and you can really tell from Chaos AD to Roots just how it went from like metal to more new metal, that album. And
Right.
then after that album, when Max went solo, well, not solo, but when he did the Soulfly, it seemed like it kind of started going back more into metal and thrash. That seems to be their only album that was kind of really low tuned, kind of new metal-y style.
Well, Derek, you mentioned previously that I don't know how to word it, but that Jonathan Davis kind of called out Sepultura for copying their sound, and
Yeah, on a commercial.
I listen to Roots. You can hear where he's coming from, but to me, Roots does not sound anything like a Korn record.
No, I think it's more an Indigo record.
Okay.
and that was just the sound that we were getting on heavy metal albums. You can look to just about anything that was done during that era out of Indigo, and they all have that big, heavy sound.
Yeah, even the Vanilla
Korn,
Ice, even the Vanilla Ice
Korn,
album. Yeah.
Yeah.
Korn was able to really play on that and had monstrous sales, but that was basically the Indigo Ranch drum sound. Um, and Sepultura was one of the things that made them unique sounding was Max was one of the more unique guitar players I've ever encountered. He played a four-string guitar
Right. He doesn't use the E and the B strings.
at all,
Right.
and yet he gets this amazing sound out of four strings. I mean, it sounds like a guy playing three guitars instead of two-thirds of a guitar.
Well, that's the thing about Roots is almost what I call the layering of distortion. You know, I mean, it's got such heavy distortion, yet it still sounds smooth. It doesn't sound chaotic. It doesn't sound compressed to death. You know,
Oh, I had been working on uh, building pedals, distortion pedals, sort of became an obsession through the 90s for me. And I came up with what was called the bigger muff, which was used on a fair number of albums, but it was really put to the test with Sepultura to the point where Andreas, after the album was finished, said, I can't go on tour without that pedal. And I said, you can't take that pedal on tour. It's
it'll fall apart.
Handmade on a piece of wood with
Yeah.
a breadboard kind of a
Well, it's
construction.
PCB board. I think
it's PCB board
right.
with a tube hanging out in the middle of nowhere and
Right.
two power supplies and all that kind of stuff. And he said, would you build me a pedal that I could take with me? And I copied the circuit, which was a very time-consuming project, into a rack-mounted box
It's awesome.
that he put in his guitar rack. But I made it so that he had a hard on-off switch where he could use it for those distorted parts, because the bigger muff was one of those pedals that was so feedbacky and distorted that the second you turned it on, it was screaming,
Right. Right.
even if there was nothing coming into it. So he had to have a hard on-off pedal where he could utilize it live.
You know, I mean, of course, the essential elements of this record are the drums and the bass and the guitar and the vocals. He also, you can hear, has that distorted vocal that Derek and we've all been talking about in the previous podcast, that kind of 90s. That's almost more of an indicator of it being kind of new metal, is the heavily distorted vocal parts, almost sounding like they're coming through a radio or a telephone.
Well, for those distorted vocal parts, we really went further than we had ever gone before with Sepultura in mounting a couple of mics in front of him. Now, we had done that before, but now had focused in on a mic that we called the Ed Wood mic, which was an old American, not just USA, but a company called American Microphone Company that made some very Art Deco looking mics, and we used an American ribbon mic that was then fed into the Dean Jensen matching box, which will appear as a cut-in somewhere in this, and also ran it at that point through one of several distortion devices, including the Apollo, which will be cut in as a single photo somewhere, and the Sanner.
Well, Richard, let's clarify that just a little bit, if you would, please. you're saying for the viewers and listeners out there that the singer was singing not into just one mic at one time,
Multiples.
but rather multiple
Right.
mics at one
And
time.
and we would choose which mic sounded the best for each section of the song.
So
I was
Like
gonna.
the verse may have been through a Telefunken 250, run into a Universal Audio 176 tube limiter and nothing else.
Mhm.
And the choruses could be the Ed Wood mic run through the matching box into the Sanner distortion and possibly through an Electro Harmonics Electric Mistress or
Okay.
some sort of delay and distortion device, or the Apollo distortion device, or I think by that time we were pretty much done with the MXR Distortion Plus as our main vocal distortion device. But we were using a variety of distortion devices to give each song a unique signature.
Well, that's really important to point out because I've worked in a studio before where we had an in-house drum set, and every session I would set up the mics or set up the drums, set up the mics, and bands would come in all the time and they would use the in-house set. And the engineer told me, these are the drum mics I use on it. This is the set we use, right? And that's what I was going to say with your recordings, going from Korn to Slipknot to Sepultura, into Soulfly. That's really important to point out that you did evolve with the vocals. You didn't. It isn't just repetition. Like, oh, these guys are heavy. Let's put him, on this mic through this box. He's good to go. Next album, it's kind of cool that you were able to evolve with.
Well,
the
that's
sessions.
also obviously an ideal situation is to sit partners to sit there with the drummer and get the sound they want, but that's also a budgetary thing.
It
I mean
is
Well, it's
budgetary.
also a thing where Indigo had 20 snare drums to choose from, besides whatever the drummer brought in, probably 24 tom-toms that
Jeez.
could be used at any given moment, and 3 or 4 really great kick drums that could be interchanged, although Igor pretty much stuck to his own drums and his own cymbals, but we did have a huge collection of stuff that was used here and there, and also in the percussion live tracks that were cut outside so that there was no room reverb or anything like that.
I wanted to.
Indigo's one of the places where we didn't do what Derek was talking about of having a one-size-fits-all sound.
Right.
And anecdotally, I'll tell a story about, I went to Japan to do an album, and we went down to Polygram on the south coast of Japan, and we were doing a horn section, and I got there, and all the mics were set up, the board was already EQ'd, and the levels were set and limiters were set, and I said, this isn't the setup I want to use. And they said, well, this is the setup we always used for a horn section. And I said, well, why on earth would you do that? And they said, well, because
It worked once.
Well, a famous American engineer had been there a couple years before,
And they kept
had
the
gotten
settings.
a great horn sound.
Oh, yeah.
They photographed and wrote down every detail of it, and I came in
That's
and
very practical. of
ripped
them.
it all out, started over, and probably to this day they still use my horn setup.
Yeah.
That's terrible. That's so
Latin,
terrible.
no imagination.
That's so
Yeah.
terrible. I hate. You were saying budgetary.
But I mean, even the EQs and the levels were set on the board, and I said, you haven't even seen the horn section yet.
right.
Well, that's also, that kind of brings up a side point of the fear of plugins, because obviously with plugins and using digital recording software, they have preset parameters. You want a bright vocal, you just click that, and it's going to set the EQ, the compression,
Yeah.
any kind of other
Just like-
effects.
It's just like the 1176. Like I have the actual 1176 here in my rack,
Right.
but
I remember when you got that.
yeah, and I still love it. And I have the plugin that came with it. And I was playing around, and I went on and I was clicking through the plugin and it was like vocals, this is the one you
Right.
use for
Right.
vocals. This is the one you use for a bass or whatever. I'm like,
Well,
I
they
guess
give
that's
you a
helpful.
good starting point,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I'll bet in every instance you're able to get a better sound through the actual rack-mounted
Oh
analog
gosh. Oh yeah, of
device
course.
than you can through the plug-in.
No, that's the whole point, is that we're not bashing plugins. We all use them ourselves.
But
I'm
we would all
talking
like
about
to have
Of course.
hardware.
the preset and whether or not you have fear of venturing beyond the preset. Now, if you're in a studio and you have time constraints, can you sit there and EQ for 5-10 minutes just for one particular little instance, or do you just go with the preset and somebody says, I like that, okay, that saves you 10-20 minutes in EQing? And
Well, as an engineer and producer, I know what I want to hear,
right.
which may make me slightly different than a guy who's very used to using only presets.
Right.
And in knowing what I want to hear, I'm able to EQ, compress, gate, whatever I need to do in a real hurry, because I know what I want to hear coming out of the speakers for any individual spot in a song. So
that's the
it's
point.
It's not like I'm EQing for 20 minutes and gee, do we like the one that I used 8 minutes ago or this one better? I know what I'm going for, and most good engineers rely on their ears rather than on something that's been set up. I'm almost I may be one of those guys that just doesn't like doing things the way that they're
supposed to do, quote unquote.
Quote, yeah, I was gonna say technically supposed to.
The way they've been laid out by some equipment manufacturer. I like getting the sound that I want to hear.
Sure.
Yeah,
as did, I think that was one of the attractions of Indigo, is we had so much equipment and so many guys would come in and be intimidated by it and not be able to do it. But the great engineers and producers who came through, who really knew what they wanted to hear, were able to quickly adapt to it.
Came and dialed it in and we're ready to go.
Get the sounds that we wanted.
Right. Yep, that's the whole point of this little sidetrack, is that don't be afraid to experiment and also dial in that sound you want right away, and forget the presets if you
a little,
if it doesn't work.
Sometimes the most bizarre settings, which a good engineer gets used to, things that may seem bizarre to a newcomer, but sometimes knocking 15 dB out of the middle of a drum mic, or adding 15 dB to the top, which is the extreme of any normal equalizer, rather than +2 here and -2 there and stuff like that, and basically ending up with something that's just slightly better than what was coming through from the flat mic. It requires making a commitment, because especially in my day where we were putting it to tape, you didn't get to record the raw sound and the EQ sound and then later on decide, nope, that wasn't the one, and go back and fiddle with it again.
Right.
So
undo, like in Pro Tools.
undo.
Yeah, there was no undo button on the 2-inch 24 track.
So I'd like to take a minute and address some pretty amazing memorabilia you have somewhere in the room right there by you of Max. Some stuff he had signed and some pictures with him, and I think it's like his wife and his son. So
one of which is the and it'll appear as a separate photo, which Derek will cut in. One is just a signed picture of the group.
It's awesome.
Written, with love to me, and the other is to Richard from Max and Gloria.
Yeah.
And
His
it's
wife.
Max. Well, it's not his wife. It's Max with his newly born son Zion.
Oh yeah.
Now I just got a Christmas card from them 3 weeks ago from Max and Gloria, who've remained good friends, and Zion's grown up now.
Oh
You
yeah.
know,
Wow.
darn, if you look around and all of a sudden these infants are grown people,
Yeah.
and
So fast. So fast.
yeah, and I remember just anecdotally, um, Gloria, who was, as you'll read later on, part of the reason that Max formed Soulfly,
Oh
because the
yeah.
group didn't want Gloria to be their
Managing.
manager,
Yeah.
no matter how good she was, and she was unbelievable. She's great, but I always thought that she was a redhead, and finally, after working with them over several albums, and my wife said, Gloria's green hair, and I said, green?
Yeah.
Well, see, I'm red-green colorblind,
Oh,
uh,
okay.
so I just saw the shade of it and assumed it was red, when in fact it was bright green. Gloria always made this incredible statement, be it in fashion or speaking her own mind, and always had the group's and Max's interests at heart, regardless of what the group felt.
So there you go. I learned something new. Well, I mean, I learned a lot new today so far, but I didn't know you were colorblind.
We call it color deficient. It's politically correct.
Yes, there you go. Sorry, color deficient.
Well, that brings up the point I talked about in a previous podcast about Andreas Kisser, and I actually brought the article with me today for this, since it's Sepultura and Soulfly and related. It's Guitar World, not Guitar Player, Guitar World January issue. There was a Q&A.
2014. This is a brand new issue.
Brand new.
Still in the news.
Q&A with Andreas Kisser, however you pronounce his name. And one of the questions to him is, do you have any regrets about the way things went down with Max leaving the band? And just to sort of paraphrase, he said, so everything was kind of a mess. And after we said that we wanted to replace Gloria with another manager, Max basically said, shove off, and left.
Yeah.
With the band he formed, Soulfly, he basically just kept the same structure that we took 10 years to build, recording in the same studio where we did Roots, using the same producer, the same mixer, everything. For us, we really had no choice to start from scratch and find a new manager and a new singer. That's specifically talking about.
I co-produced that album with Max.
Well, it's talking about Indigo and you.
Max became a co-producer on several albums I did, including an album for the group Animal from Argentina. Max and I co-produced that album.
Oh, cool.
Because they were such fans of Sepultura, Max in particular, and for a lot of it, Max wasn't even in the studio. We would send him DATs, digital audio tapes, with little miniature tapes from the 90s, and he would listen to it and comment, and then we would, correct from there. But I was basically engineering and sitting in the production chair, and then he was, after the fact, telling me what he wanted or giving me input. And that album ended up being another one of the Indigo Gold albums. And to get a gold album in South America is not easy.
Well, by the way, the DAT tapes,
you have to almost sell more albums than there are people.
The DAT tape was a product that was initially offered to the public. The public rejected it, and the professional industry adopted it as one of their own.
Yeah, it was a 16-bit 44.1K
digital audio tape
with a switch that allowed you to do it at 48K, and that was the beginning of the 48, 96, 192 struggle in digital sampling rates. But it was primarily a way of recording a session and then making a CD out of it at the 44.1 sample rate.
Right.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
DAT tapes.
I was going to say, you have quite a collection still of real
DAT
tapes.
right.
And
I do
everything.
have boxes and boxes of
and it's up on the
original mix tapes from sessions.
Well,
Probably
a band.
there are probably people who'd love to have them.
There was a band
Yes.
that contacted us, or Richard specifically, and I said, "Well, I'll go through the DATs and try and find their final mixes." We found them. They finally decided they didn't want them, but yeah, the DATs were still sitting there, and we have a DAT machine as well. And you know, it's old school, as they say.
Flipped it
But
on and played it, and it played perfect. It sounded great.
yeah, those DAT mixes. We actually have DAT mixes of Jimi Hendrix too.
Yeah.
Which I heard one of those DATs and I was like, that I didn't even know he did that in a song. It sounded so good. But back to Sepultura, was the band having conflicts at the time of Roots? I mean, because subsequently they broke up, you know?
Yes, they were. And part of the conflict was, well, all of the conflict was between Max and Gloria and other members of the band. Over what ended up being probably, 15 years later, looking back at it, things that weren't worth making federal case out of. But it put a lot of friction between the band, and Max and his brother Igor almost weren't talking to each other at certain points. Yet they were able to get these unbelievable performances that anybody who listens to the album Roots knows. Ross squeezed performances out of these guys that were as good as anything anybody's ever done.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, the sort of public knowledge was that they went out on tour, and then Max's stepson was murdered, and the way that his burial was handled became a huge point of conflict within the band as well.
Yes.
And they went public with that. That's not rumor or anything.
Well, he was.
Right.
He was.
But prior to that, there was obviously a lot of friction within the unit, even before they
There
met.
was.
Right. Okay.
There was.
And this album was dedicated to him, correct? As well as
Yes,
as well as the Soulfly album that came
Right.
out.
Dana Woods, I think, is his name.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you know, it's another one of those great heavy metal / new metal
Tragedies.
thrash. Oh yeah, with Dana, but I'm talking about the record.
The record was anything but a tragedy.
Yeah,
No,
bro.
it was a big success for them. It put them on the map.
Yeah, because at the time when you think about Roots, and even going back to the music video, which was shot, I believe, in Brazil, it's crazy to think of. I remember seeing it on MTV as a kid, and I remember going like, "What is going on here?" Like I had never seen anything like that. I've never really listened to metal mixed with tribal music, mixed with
Right.
world music. It was really. Well, I'm not familiar with the Brazil, the scene there, especially at that time. But for the United States, that was really awesome and really
unusual.
original.
Well, did they come in with those ideas, or was that adapted in the studio?
I'm not sure. I believe they were planning on doing it from the get-go. And when they did it, they really went out into it wasn't like a tribe that was on the edge of a village that you could fly to.
Mm.
They literally packed into this place carrying their gear and the videographer, carrying large amounts of equipment so that they could do that one song with this tribe. And it became, one of the watermarks of that whole era is them doing this very special thing.
I met the videographer for that video. His name was Thomas, and correct me if I'm wrong, if anybody watches this. He said he did it, and I went to his website, which is something like Doom Inc., and he has like a list of videos he's done, and that was one of them. And we had talked about that a little bit, and that was from what I remember him talking about, saying it was a really cool experience. And they like won like MTV awards for it and all sorts of stuff. It was
such a departure from regular heavy metal. I think that's part of Roots' appeal is that it just had this worldwide appeal because it had a worldwide sound. They had gone way beyond the structures of what a heavy metal song should be, or new metal, whatever genre you want to call it.
And it wasn't your typical MTV pick of the album,
Hmm.
couple in the car in the garage kissing.
Right.
Fast cars, fast girls, and all that.
Yeah, it wasn't that at all. It was, a slice of reality, um, and that's where the word, the title roots. This was really roots.
Hmm.
The roots of their music was this tribal beat.
What about the guitar sound? We've briefly discussed the drums. He brought in his own drum kit, house gear, and the secret tiny amp, or was it something else?
Both,
Both.
both
Okay.
as usual. One of the things that really started to get exploited on this album was uh, my Ampeg flip top 12-inch Portaflex.
Okay.
Most people have a 15 or an 18-inch Portaflex, the 15 being the more common one, and we had several of them that we used a lot on bass. But the 12-inch Portaflex, which originally was a gift to me from the Moody Blues
Hmm.
way back in the late 70s, was one of the best stingingly bright, piercing guitar sound amps that I've ever heard. It was just right there in your face.
Hmm.
And the one that we have, which will also be in a couple of photos, has a little taped A plus in Ross Robinson's own handwriting on the backside of the amp, right below where the Ampeg tube markings are. And this was the unique version of the Ampeg 12-inch Portaflex that used the 7868 tubes. There were only a few of them made. Most of them used either the ELs or the 6L6 type tube, but there was one small run of them that used 7868s and was part of the reason that this amp has such a biting sound. I mean, it literally bit your head off when you cranked it up. You didn't have to use any effects or anything. It had a clarity that you can hear throughout the album in various parts, and was used a lot. Another thing unique to this Sepultura Roots album was that's when Indigo built what was our vocal booth. And it all started out with Chuck Johnson wanting to isolate Max so that he could be in the room without having to be in one of our, quote, ISO rooms. And we put together some large studio gobos that had slide-up plexiglass windows, and we put a few of those together and then put packing material around it and put packing material nailed to the wall for the roof, and hung cardboard and pieces like that, so that it was basically two huge gobos or sound absorber with windows, and we then, it was such a success vocal sounds wise that we ended up actually nailing the whole structure together, getting a curtain for the door that we bought from a theater that was going out of business, and it was the actual sound curtain, which is this huge multi-layer,
absorbent,
absorbent doorway that you could walk through, and then we made a roof for it and everything, and it was actually nailed to the wall and existed for the rest of Indigo's history, and everybody used it just because it was such an incredible sounding vocal booth. There were no square corners. It had the back wall was
ventilation.
Very little.
I was going to say that's something that I fight with all the time.
And
good point.
The back wall and the side wall were the original George Augsburger acoustician designed
Wow.
materials, which was pegboard covered with indoor-outdoor carpeting. And since it was pegboard, it let a certain percentage of the sound through. And behind that, we had these large Corning, uh, I think it's 504 battens hanging, which absorbed out the harsh mid-range parts.
The stuff you
And
remember.
that
Yeah, that's
became,
great.
or
It's
is it
amazing.
404? It's one of those, the standard
It
Dow
worked. That's what
Corning
Yeah.
counts.
material that was hanging behind this pegboard covered with indoor-outdoor carpet.
Right.
And that just gave the room its unique sound, in addition to the fact that it had what was already used as acoustic gobos with these huge plexiglass windows
Yeah.
that you could slide up.
There are photos of that on the Mystery Red HQ YouTube page. They're part of a video montage showing the Indigo Ranch client list, and somewhere the whole client list video is only about 3 minutes. But if you're interested in seeing what he's talking about, there's a photo montage of most of the photos of the main recording room, also a few of the vocal booth.
I wanted to cover one thing
Sure.
real quick about Ross Robinson, since you worked with him so much. I've never met the guy, never seen him in person, but I'm obviously very familiar with his work. Now, out of the things we've covered, okay, he's worked with the artists we've covered so far, and you said he would go in kind of as like a fifth member or as a 10th member or whatever, and get what he wanted out, out of the members. When he came in, was he an equipment guy? Did he know anything about equipment?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He had a recording studio in the San Fernando Valley. I don't think it was a great success, but he worked the way up from the rank, engineering
Sure.
to production. He was very knowledgeable in every aspect of the equipment and the mixing and the stuff like that. And I remember he brought a few pieces of equipment. There wasn't much left over after he disbanded his studio, but he brought and gave me a couple of direct boxes and stuff like that had his studio stamp on them. And he knew not only how to, but what to use to get the sounds that he wanted in many cases. And working as an engineer with him was always a thrill, because you were working with somebody who wasn't ignorant of what you were doing, and it made it a lot better. When you decided you wanted to put something up, he knew what you were doing.
He also sounded like he produced as an advocate instead of an adversary. Some producers will go in and intimidate the artist to produce a performance.
We'll have some podcasts about
put their gun
a
down.
producer like that.
Exactly.
Yeah,
because they're out there and they'll come
Cool.
in and they'll say the only way I'm going to get the performance I want is to scare or intimidate.
they
Right.
will, yeah.
To be
Well,
honest,
Ross-
though, I was going to say I've
Ross
worked
knew
some,
how to get the confidence of the players so that they could put forth their best performances imaginable.
Right.
And he knew when he got it.
Cool.
I've
What were
worked
you
a
gonna
few
say, Jared?
sessions. I've worked some sessions out here in LA that will leave the genre up to the listener's imagination, but it doesn't
Okay.
normally require a band. And a lot of times after working in the studio, even assisting, the producer will come in and just move a fader. Yeah, it sounds good. Put the vocals up a little bit, and that's all they do.
And then they take production
They
credit.
take credit for it, and it kills me because I'm like, okay, first off, there's no actual musicians in here. The guy's not singing, and you come in and move a fader, and that doesn't make you an engineer, let alone get any credit for it. So that's one of my personal hot button issues, obviously,
Yeah.
is the untalented coming in and claiming fame.
Well,
And
I can't say that Ross didn't do that on occasion, but keep in mind this album was mixed by Andy Wallace, and Andy is a uh, solitary um, do-it-himself mixer,
Mm, mm.
and
Yeah, I think Derek's just talking about how people will come in and take credit for work that they didn't
yeah,
really do, and because they have,
I've seen more of that in my lifetime than probably most engineer, producers, record
I think
studio owners, whatever.
right.
But I bear no grudge.
right.
I didn't need the credits, and I was just always grateful to be on scene for some of these great pieces of music.
I was
Yeah.
gonna say I think Andy Wallace mixed. My friends were in this band called Trust Company that Ron Geffen and who toured that whole scene, Disturbed Corn, and that whole toured that whole scene like 10 years ago. But I think he did their album too, and from what I remember, it's pretty amazing. I mean, I still listen to the album, but I'll have to double check the credits on that. There's
Oh,
just so many
he goes way
names.
back. He mixed the Cult Electric, which is one of my favorite kind of harder rock.
Which
That was
one
from
was
the
it?
'80s.
I'm
The
sorry.
Cult Electric.
Uh-huh.
Cool. Okay, gotcha.
You
It
know,
was
he
it
he
was their
had a
first
lot
record
of
with Rick Rubin that kind of broke them. They were kind of a '60s psychedelic alternative scene
Hmm.
band, and then Rick Rubin comes in and makes them sound a little more similar to something like AC/DC, and Wallace mixed that record, and that was the first time I saw his
he
name.
had a few set formulas that he would use for getting certain sounds, but he paid one by one attention to every track, and that speaks highly of them.
Sure.
Rick
Yeah.
Rubin did a couple albums at Indigo
Cool.
that he
Very
took
cool.
full production credit for,
Hmm.
and I don't know if this is right or not, but I think he only set foot at Indigo less than a half a dozen times, yet got full production credit for doing these albums.
He's actually known for that. Artists have spoken out. He did. We talked previously about Slipknot, and he did their third record, which was a big hit. But I think that's why they didn't go back to him, because Corey wanted somebody there on the spot going over these vocal performances with him. And
Like Ross.
yeah,
Ross was there for every note, every nuance. He knew how to get what he needed to have a finished record.
I
And,
think I think on some of Rubin's productions, maybe some of the larger artists, he is there, but a notorious one is Metallica Death Magnetic. They were kind of happy that he wasn't there, that he just kind of came in, listened to songs and said, this needs work, this doesn't, and then left.
I've only listened to that album once, and that was just for the compression craze that everybody was talking about.
Yeah, we
did a
article on it. Richard and I collaborated on an article talking about, I approached him with the article, and he added some notes about they pushed compression to the limit.
Yeah, that's a whole nother issue.
Yeah.
From being the only original tool, like Richard was saying, you could use in the studio, to being something that music requires. Like, you can't release anything without compression given, but it's just, some music it's gotten to be quite a bit.
It's the loudness war, as they call it.
What?
The loudness. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. I'm sorry, what?
Good one. Yeah. Anyway, any final thoughts about Sepultura and Roots?
Yeah, guest appearances. Jonathan Davis,
Okay, right,
DJ
right.
Lethal, and one of my favorites, of course. Well, they're all my favorites. Geez, it's like trading cards here. I'm just like Korn and everybody, but Mike Patton from Faith No More.
yes.
That dude.
God, it was a thrill when he showed up.
That dude is just like amazing. Okay.
Yeah.
So in my hometown in Pensacola, Florida, I went to go see Tomahawk open for Tool, and Tomahawk was fronted by Mike Patton, and they came out on stage all dressed up in cop uniforms, and the crowds were booing them. We were at the Civic Center, so it was the biggest venue in Pensacola, which seats everybody.
10,000?
Yeah,
about 10,000.
it's like the biggest one there. They were booing him. He started slamming his head into his Marshall 4x12 cabinet on stage, And I actually have, this was so long ago, but I actually have a little sample. I had a phone or something in my pocket, and I took a sample of the crowd booing him. Like I said, I'm a sound guy. I'm not a pirater. I'm just a sound guy. And I have actually the sample still of him saying, F you, Pensacola. And I was like, what? And it's so funny. I was listening to it the other day. It was just everybody was booing him, and I was like, oh my gosh, do they not know that's Mike Patton?
Yeah, yeah.
Mr. Bungle. He
Yeah.
was doing stuff that no one would have touched, and he
Right.
was successful at it.
Yeah, I think I often barbecued for the bands, and I think the night that Mike was there was one of the nights that I barbecued for everybody, and it was one of those big party nights every time he showed up. Also, you mentioned DJ Lethal,
Yeah,
um,
talent right there.
who I had known since he was
Just a
not
little
an
lethal.
infant, but his father, Grisha, was one of the best guitar players I ever heard in my life.
Mhm.
And he was the guitar player on Mosley Grape,
Right,
the
right.
follow-up
Oh, wow.
album for Moby Grape.
Mhm.
And he would bring his son in. I used Grisha for the guitar studio guitarist on many albums, and Grisha would bring his son in, and his son, who later became DJ Lethal,
Mhm.
was so interested in everything that lit up or had a knob or moved that we would always have to set up a little area of equipment for him to be able to twist the knobs or
Get
press
outta
the
here.
buttons or something like that so that he wouldn't interfere with the actual stuff that was being used for the recordings. And he literally grew up in a studio. Indigo
Mhm.
probably be one of his big influences for wanting to touch equipment and have
Sure.
that hands-on thing that a DJ does. And you know, when I saw him coming in as on Limp Bizkit,
And you
and
were
then
like,
later with guest appearances on
Mhm.
other albums, it was like, he said, "Oh, this is one of my favorite places in the world. I grew up in this room."
Mhm.
Right, right.
Eh,
That's so awesome.
Uncle Richard.
See,
Yeah.
a lot of people wouldn't know that. They would just say he was from House of Pain, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they would just assume, oh, it's the guy from House of Pain. He was with Limp Bizkit. But that's a really great historical fact. That's cool. That's really cool.
I just wanted to touch on a little bit about what's happening with the podcast and the web, the
Sure.
YouTube videos. On our Facebook page, we received a letter from a studio owner in Australia. Just for his own anonymity, I won't give
Nice.
his, but he owns a studio called Sunnyside. It's in on the Gold Coast of Australia, and he just
Awesome.
wanted to say, thanks, guys, for sharing your knowledge and history with us. Indigo Ranch would have been an awesome place to be at. The Korn and Slipknot album were for sure one of the best albums I've ever owned, and since the age of 12 when I purchased them, now over 26, I still have them in good keeping sitting in my studio. I like to use them as a reference from time to time to guide me with a mix. So thanks a bunch and keep the vids coming. Fan from Australia. So I thought that was nice to hear, and thanks for everybody that's listening. And if you want to send us a
Absolutely,
letter
thank
or a
you.
note, please do. And you have questions, we'd be happy to answer them for you. But
You know,
there was
I was
one
going to
from
say
Australia.
the reference that brings up a perfect thing. When I was going to Full Sail, I was talking to some of the instructors. Some of these guys had worked with everybody like Richard, and they'd spoke to me about reference CDs, about like this was a CD. Who was it? I'm trying to remember. It was someone that can't even think who it was right now. But they were like, "This is the reference CD that you take in your studio. This is what you want to
Yeah,
achieve."
right.
And Richard, did you have any reference CDs you kept around?
A lot of producers would bring in what they considered to be a reference CD. Some of them would even bring in their own personal sound system and set it up in the other room. Um, uh, Maybe I should save this for the Neil Diamond episode, but Bob Gaudio brought in
Yes, one of my favorites.
vacuum his vacuum tube clock radio, which a studio maintenance guy had put a jack on so that you could feed a line input from a recording console through his clock radio, which was what he had listened to basically everything he had ever heard
Sure.
at home for so many years, and that was his reference.
Oh my gosh.
Well, I worked for a classical engineer, which means that I was just starting out. I was his assistant, and he would record classical musicians, horn quartets, and string sections, orchestras. And whenever he went to a system, he had a Earth, Wind, and Fire CD that was his reference, and he would tune or test the system according to that CD. I have a few myself that I like to use.
Yeah, it was it was a Peter Gabriel CD. That's exactly who it was.
Right.
I remember someone saying, I can't remember which album off the top of my head, but that was the reference CD that you should be striving to meet.
Well, that's different. That's different than I think Richard, you might know better than I do, but there's a literal reference CD which you can put in, which has a 1K tone.
I was going to say
a 500K tone.
Oh, your MRL test
yeah.
tape. But nobody's going to judge the sound of a studio by sine wave tone.
No. I know. I'm saying
played over a tape recorder.
That's a reference CD. That's all I'm saying.
That's Magnetic Reference Library. MRL was the company that made them, but basically what they were is tones for alignment of the tape machine.
So anybody who only uses Pro Tools, you're so lucky, because if you had to work tape,
you don't get to hear those tones.
You don't have to hear that.
Yeah, and your fingers would kill you. Yeah. Yeah.
As a final parting story, we had a maintenance guy. We were having trouble with the Q system. Oh, this was probably during the early 80s, and a connection had come loose on the headphone amp, and he was on a tall step stool in back of the amp rack, which was in the little hallway leading into the room, and he had the test tone turned, and this is just stupid, but he had it turned all the way up to 0 on the console. And he was, like, why am I not hearing this? And plugging things in. And he was standing on top of this ladder next to the amp rack.
Oh, no.
And suddenly he hit the plug in that sent that tone to his headphones.
Oh, my God.
Knocked him flying.
Yep.
That's incredible.
He threatened to quit. And it was like, you're a maintenance guy. You know better than to do this.
How dare you?
Anyway, we're going to be coming back with our next podcast on the Soulfly album. It probably will not be as long as this one, but we do have some interesting stuff to share, and we hope to see you there. Any parting comments?
It's always an honor to talk with you guys. Appreciate it.
Yes.
And thanks to everybody once again. The
obligatory
Sunnyside,
and that's in Australia.
Gold Coast, Australia.
Gold Coast, nice, man. Thank you very much.
Yeah, welcome to you.
And again,
let them know where to find us.
Well, he found us already on Facebook.
Anybody else?
Oh yeah, I said, thanks for the compliments. Would you please spread the word?
Can we? Will. If he has a website, can we put a post in the description below to check out?
I think so. I saw his Facebook page. There's a.
But if you want to find us, where would somebody go to find other information about us?
The website Studio Rat HQ has a bio, and of course the Facebook page.
www.studiorathq.com.
Right.
There's also a Facebook page
/ Studio Rat HQ.
And there is now on YouTube, you can find Indigo Ranch or Studio Rat HQ.
Right.
.com.
YouTube.com / Studio Rat HQ.
I was gonna say you can find Steven and I on Facebook, but then again,
Richard.
You can find my grandma on Facebook these days. Apparently, from what I hear, Facebook is not as cool as Instagram, so I have to set up an account there and then do something else, and then
we're also in the works of setting up a Twitter account.
I still haven't
and
learned
LinkedIn and so forth, but basically, we're there if you want to find us, And we'll see you again next podcast.
Also, we're sorry. I think
Happy New Year.
Yes.
We're on Spreaker. I mean, there's so many
Spreaker.
outlets and avenues. We're also on Spreaker. I just started loading that, so
And you can find all of the links on StudioRatHQ.com,
right.
including a zillion photos
Yep.
that we have posted on Flickr.
There are also a zillion photos that aren't on Flickr on the StudioRatHQ.com page. Richard,
And people keep sending in new photos. We really
Yes.
appreciate
yes,
it.
That was
Any
awesome
photos
this
that
week.
you've got of things that happened at Indigo or during any of the albums recording under our auspices, please post them. We're very appreciative. Thank you.
And we will be back. Literally, we're going to try and shoot 2 in a row here because they're so similar of Soulfly. So next is the Soulfly premiere or first album, however you want to call it. So we'll talk to you in a few minutes. Thank you. And Stephen Couch, Derek Jablonski, and Richard Kaplan signing off. Goodbye, everybody.